Hello, this is Alex Burkett, and you are listening to the Long Game Podcast. This episode is a part of our Kitchen Side series, where we pull back the curtain and show you the behind-the-scenes conversations, debates, strategies, and brainstorming sessions that we have at our agency. This one's a novel episode. I am interviewing my co-founders, Allie and David. So here's the backstory. We have been trying an experiment internally. What if instead of trying to write and rank for keywords like the typical content strategy entails, what if we built a decentralized content marketing engine? So what does that mean? In practice, this means we come up with ideas and strong viewpoints that we have at our agency. We mostly do this through these Kitchen Side episodes and through mining client pain points and research. Then we hash these ideas out and distribute them through all the channels that are available to us, as opposed to just our centralized blog, and making each of us as an individual a node in the system of the idea distribution. So this means that when we do a conversation on the kitchen side, we turn that into a blog post via transcript, we chip that away, and I share tweets and LinkedIn statuses about that topic, and so do Allie and David and the rest of our team. So we distribute via those social channels, but the initial idea comes from the conversation. We also share these through our company email list, our company Twitter, and company LinkedIn, as well as our personal email lists. We create video and audiograms, which are also shared on these channels. We push to YouTube and we push to podcast. And we also answer Quora, Reddit, and Slack group questions with snippets from the content that we created. And of course, we publish a blog post, which is then cleaned up from a transcription that's optimized for a keyword, so we kind of get the SEO benefits as well. Anyway, it's really easy to talk into a microphone and come up with ideas, but the bottleneck here has been finding the time and motivation to basically become a mini thought leader on social for each of us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to interview David and Allie, mine their responses, and ghostwrite some of their social for them. So I'm basically using this interview as a transcript to write tweets and LinkedIn posts for them. So we're going to try this for a couple months and see how the process goes. So in this conversation, I asked David and Allie about their core beliefs about content marketing, contrarian views on the space, and things that they think are wrong or misconceptions. And we also go off on several tangents related to SEO, content, and salmon. Without further ado, here is this episode of the Long Game Podcast. But more so, I want to just take what you guys say and use this as fodder to ghostwrite or to write tweets and LinkedIn posts. And also, it's kind of cool to just establish our fundamental values and beliefs with content, because I feel like we have them, but we haven't actually like consolidated or talked about them in one place. So to start at a high level, what attracted you to content marketing in the first place? Like, what brought you into this world, David?
Wow, this is going back. In college, I realized I wanted to get into marketing or like business. And so I just Googled shit about marketing, and I landed on SEO being kind of a key thing to learn about. This is back in like 2013 or 2012 or something. And as I dug into SEO, I was like, wait a minute, SEO is content. Like, why are people talking about these two things differently? And so I was like, I need to become a good writer, or at least learn how to write well. And I think writing was always something I was super interested in. So I felt attracted to it. And then I got a marketing job in an agency where my job was just like churning out content. And so I just learned, oh, this is what business content marketing is. I thought it could be better, but once I got to HubSpot, I was like, okay, this is what a big content machine looks like. Cool. So I think it's just by nature of my interest, it led me there.
Mm-hmm. And Allie, how about you?
Mine was definitely rooted in writing. I went to college for marketing, but I've been a writer since I was, young enough to write. Never knew how they would pair together. When I started freelancing out of college, like I didn't know what SEO was. I just knew like how to write a good piece. At that point, it wasn't as like potent as a thing. That was like 2016, I guess. My stuff was more editorial at the time, but it wasn't until I got to HubSpot that I understood like how much bigger content marketing was than just blogging. And I understood like how my writing played like a larger role in the funnel and larger marketing projects and campaigns and just general like bottom line efforts.
Was there a moment in either of your careers that was kind of an aha moment where, like, I'm sure that content marketing means something different to you today than it did when you started. Was there a moment when you understood content the way you do today as a viable acquisition channel, ROI generating business function? Like, when was there like a shift in your understanding of what content is or could be?
Mine was definitely at HubSpot because I had a bigger picture of what my work was doing in general. As a freelancer, you tend to be siloed just in the like production side. You don't really get the research or the results. So at HubSpot, being part of like the full end-to-end content marketing projects helped me understand like, yeah, my writing can sound good and read well, and it can be some of my best work, but this is how it also impacts like the organization I'm a part of and basically makes people money, makes me money. That was when I really realized how it was more like just as much marketing as it was content.
Was there also some, you said you were more editorial before that. Was there also some semblance of just seeing how SEO factors in and how like there's more of a structured plan and quantifiable kind of growth plan? Or
Yeah, I probably swayed toward SEO really strongly at first, which was like over optimizing. Like it became a little bit too formulaic for me and the way my brain works. And since then, I feel like I've established a balance where it's just as much editorial as it is like optimization. But there definitely was a time where I was like, I literally can't just sit down and write something that I care about. Like I can, but if it's going to serve this broader like distribution purpose and these conversion goals, like there needs to be other things injected in the writing process. And that was probably one of the biggest and toughest lessons I learned early on at HubSpot, just because it wasn't how I started my like writing career, but it was a very valuable lesson.
I actually, I'll move to David in a second, but I have a question on that because this is related to me personally and my struggles with writing. So I started out not really knowing much about SEO, and we did backlink building at LaunchStarter, but it wasn't like super keyword driven content like HubSpot has. And I actually feel like through working at HubSpot and through the tools like Ahrefs and ClearScope, like now when I sit down to write for my personal blog, I feel like I may have lost some semblance of my voice in but it was replaced by essentially this keyword focus. So I'm trying to shake out of that. And one idea that I have is to just like not look at keywords in general. Another idea is to just like try different tonalities, like to try to do like a very like formal voice or try to do a very like funny voice or something like that, like focus more on the voice than the keyword itself. But how did you break out of that over optimization mindset?
Honestly, I didn't really at HubSpot. It was a very like key part of the function I served on the team. It wasn't until I started doing kind of that thought leadership project that I realized there were different ways to approach things. Personally, I have since struggled writing for myself. I tend to start writing through through talking. Like I'll record and transcribe some of the things just because I don't even have a chance to look at like, what is the SERP? Like, what are the SERP saying? Or like, what do people care about? Because like, I'm still it's so ingrained in me, but it took me a while at HubSpot. It wasn't until I started dabbling in completely different content types and different purposes that I understood like this is literally one of thousands of ways to approach a piece of content. So.
Yeah, I struggle with the same thing. And that's why I like writing like my personal monthly newsletters because like it's email, like there's no point in doing keyword research. It's just literally what am I thinking? And that has broken me out of it because I think the keyword driven marketing, like to be discovered thing kind of took away my sense of creativity and maybe instilled more fear of like, this is how it should be done. And like, maybe a couple of years ago, it was very trendy to write those blog posts that were super tactical with like the screenshots and captions and image. And I used to write a lot of stuff like that for my blog and like other companies when I was freelancing. And a part of me still feels like everything I write needs to be actionable. I have those sort of images, but really a lot of my thoughts naturally like kind of high level strategic. And I've just gotten more like not having to get as tactical all the time. So in a sense, I'm kind of just like trying to unlearn all what I consider now bad habits from SEO and content marketing to have that more unique voice and like my actual personality, not this like SEO filtered personality.
Yeah.
It's funny. We're all in the same place there. And it's kind of paradoxical, or like there's some conflict, because like, I don't know if you'll agree with me here, but I feel like SEO has been, I believe in SEO as the biggest kind of distribution channel and lever when you're building a business generating ROI generating content program. Like there's pretty much no better way to get predictable results. But then at the same time, it's kind of eroded my ability to think originally. It's like, where's the trade-off there? Like, how do I balance those two things?
Well, and that's what's, I think, a lot of people who are either like staff writers, content writers, SEO writers, like people, that's their day in, day out job, is they have to become accustomed to writing about things that they don't know. And what happens is you start to follow this like mental formula that is rooted in SEO research, because you validate this idea. So you're like, someone wants to know about this, and I have to figure out how to educate people to the best of my ability. So then when you kind of turn the page and it's time for you to just write your own stuff, you're like, I know what's in my mind, but like, I don't know where to start, because it doesn't, like David said, it doesn't look like this. It didn't go like this. Like my brainstorm process doesn't resemble what I'm used to. And so it kind of like cuts you off at the knees, like creatively, or at least like creative, like confidence in your creativity, because you just like follow this step-by-step thing, which works, right? Like there's a reason that there's so many freelance projects out there, but I don't know. I think the demand over time will lessen for that kind of content if it hasn't already.
Do you think that we at Omniscient balance that like creativity and SEO driven content well? Like, how do you think we blend those two together? Because I think we do.
For our personal stuff or for our clients?
Both.
I would say clients, it depends on like what they're looking for. I think even still, like with the way that we build strategy, even if they're looking for SEO content, drive organic traffic, all that jazz, like we can still deliver a nice balance between like a validated keyword idea and an interesting piece of content with interviews or original research. For our own personal content, I do think we balance it. At first, like at the beginning of the year, I was all gung-ho on the SEO content, but we talked over time about how that wasn't the best fit for us now. It might be one day, but I would rather take a validated keyword idea and write it through a conversation like this versus looking at what else is already out there and just kind of regurgitating, because that was the process that I was used to. So
yeah, well, I think with our clients, we do this well too, because like at the end of the day, we want to bring them traffic and conversions. And usually we're doing that through keyword driven strategy. But I know in many cases, we're going to reach out to internal experts and even external experts to do more of a journalistic style piece where we're actually getting the subject matter insights, as opposed to just rehashing what ClearScope tells us to write or what the other blog posts that are ranking have written about. So is that kind of a way to differentiate or bring some more distinction to a piece, is just like bringing out outside voices in?
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to optimizing a piece of content, it really doesn't take much. It has to be good, which is relative, but like, I know we all know what not good content is. It has to be like a validated keyword idea, which that's like, I know we've discussed the SEO sandwich thing. Like the first part of it has to be like, you know, you can do your research as it applies to SEO with like Ahrefs and all that stuff. But then the back end of optimization, like not to dumb it down, but you know, there's keywords in play, there's structure in play, a lot of things with like the meta tags and stuff like that. But outside of just having good, interesting content that's relevant to what's ranking, it doesn't have to mirror what's ranking. Like it can still be a different take of like what the searcher is looking for. And that's where I think like SEO content has kind of plateaued, as it's just become literally all the same. But like what's in the middle of that sandwich, like the bulk, like the meat of your post, can be whatever you want it to be, outside sources, as long as it's relevant and good. But that's where people don't like that vagueness and those like those gray zones. So they're like, let's just do like what everyone else does, because at least we'll get up there. So maybe we have a whole other conversation about this later. I'm on my soapbox now.
Yeah. Well, to further put you on the soapbox, I know you said that we all know what bad content looks like or not good content looks like. What does not good content look like?
Oh gosh. Most of Google. I would say, and these are all relative adjectives, but like unoriginal, I would say vague. Like
and unoriginal, you mean somebody just kind of like, you can copy and paste is not the right term, but they copy and paste and then change the sentence around enough where it's, yeah.
And there's a time and place for a definition, but like most articles don't need that. And in my mind, unless you are a subject matter expert or like a known leader in the space, you probably shouldn't be writing from a place of like, I feel this, or I found this, or I gathered. Like a lot of freelance writers kind of plug themselves in as like the narrator of these articles. And they're the author, but they're not necessarily the narrator. They're just kind of a conduit of other people's knowledge. And I don't think they like do that appropriately. But no, I mean, bad content is what's already out there. I would say it's content that just skims the surface in the name of optimization. I don't know. It just depends on like the topic. It depends on I don't know. It's hard to decipher it in like a couple words.
Can I ask you both something about this idea of the conduit thing? Because I think
before we move on, I think I have two different ways of looking at bad content. I think when you look at an individual piece, like it's not helpful, it's not entertaining, it doesn't catch any nuance. It's like clearly just a general piece written by someone who doesn't know this. I think if you look at a group of content, if they're all saying the same thing, it's probably all bad content. Like, there's nothing unique.
Literally just to rank.
Yeah, because I've been doing research on my own stuff recently, and like I'll click on one article and I'll be like, okay, cool. There's the first. It's pretty helpful. I move on to the next one. It's literally the same headlines, like same H2 titles. I'm like, wait, what the fuck? And I'll go down to the first search results of Google, and I'm like, wait a minute, these are all like literally the same headlines. I'm like, clearly someone's copying someone. Like I'm not going to read the rest, know what they're all going to say.
To just like devil's advocate on that, like there's definitely something to be said about like, and that's where SERP analysis comes into play, like search engine results page, like analysis of what Google's liking that day and what they deem, whether or not we agree with it, what they deem appropriate to answer a query. But where I think people mess up is like they mirror the headers and they literally mirror the whole body. So it's like you can use similar headers if that's what is answering the query. But where people like mess up is they literally deliver the same like line for line, sometimes even word for word. And it's like, I agree with you that Google's content is boring. The algorithm is, in my opinion, a little broken. But if that's the way that I think people need to get their content on page one, they can still do that without just delivering the same BS. You know, that's where like the sandwich kind of thing comes into play.
Here's something I wonder with that, and this may go beyond content marketing to kind of like the ethics of publication. But let's say like it's kind of a chicken and egg problem with the SERP analysis. Let's say HubSpot writes an article about what is A/B testing, right? So then like they've got a high domain rating, so they're probably going to rank for that piece. Even if like they can kind of move outside of like the common ranking signals because they've got such a strong website. Or let's say it's like a new keyword and they establish that talk or like what the topics are about on that. Then other people start to mimic that. And it becomes this feedback loop where every page now starts to write about the same things. But imagine that HubSpot's first article about A/B testing is totally fucking wrong. So now you've got this expectation built in where the intent of the searchers has been trained by Google's algorithm. So then you have to kind of conform to that. So I don't know if that's a question or not, but that it seems to be something that happens with search terms.
Well, no, I mean, you said it right with a chicken and egg thing. Like Google delivers on an intent, but intents can be influenced by what Google delivers. So David, I wasn't saying I disagree with you. I was just saying from a point of like on November 10th, like in order to optimize for organic like to drive organic traffic, sometimes it does come down to getting ideas from page one because that's what Google's delivering. But Alex, you're right in that like it's kind of this self-fulfilling cycle. And that's why I think either Google needs to fundamentally change like how they rank for quality and accuracy, which I don't know how they would do that. I don't know what happens behind the scenes, or what's going to happen is people are going to start like having different like content sources and other trustworthy avenues where SEO won't be as potent of like a distribution channel. I know we all already do that, but like, I think the normal person who doesn't know how Google works, like they still go to Google for a lot of information, thus like strengthening that cycle.
So would it be fair to say that the big guys, the HubSpots, et cetera, have kind of a privilege in that they can speak outside of like what Google's intent structure maybe shows? And if you're not them, then you probably have to play the game. You probably have to fit into the system because you don't have the audience and the strength to kind of deviate from that.
They definitely have a privilege. I know Google, they've been doing this for 10 plus years. And a lot of the stuff, I think the only reason it ranks is because of like the age and the rating of their domain. I would love to see them run an experiment where they just publish complete and utter bullshit and just see what happens. And like over time, how much it dominoes. I don't know, like, I don't know if they're going to hear this or like whatever, but like, I would love to see like just how potent, like all of that is just so powerful. But yeah, I do think they have a privilege and a responsibility. But for the most part, like any low to mid domain rating sites, like it's just a domino effect. You do have to play the game.
There's something that I want to talk about, which is the content economics thing. So David, maybe you can answer this one. Given the assumption that there is privilege with these more powerful websites, is it obvious that the end goal of a content program is to build up the authority where you have that privilege and that power? Is it like kind of going along this maturity curve of content economics of starting out early, building like powerful, expensive content that ranks, leveling up through backlinking? Like, is the end goal to be like a 90 domain rating site where you can just kind of flex that power and rank for whatever you want?
Well, back to our conversation around what's the goal of content. Because I would say if you're a business, the goal of content is probably to acquire customers. And in that case, like, who gives a fuck what your domain rating is? Like, domain rating could be a lever in helping you rank for more and get more distribution. Like, as a HubSpot, like, holy shit, HubSpot like has God mode on or like cheat codes on. Like, they can launch a product and immediately start creating tons of distribution for that new product through their content engine. But right now, I hesitate to say that every company should try to playbook because it's so much more difficult now because of all the saturation. I think if we're talking about the goal of a content program, I think it comes down to the business goals. So I answered with a non-answer.
Yeah, it depends. No, so to push back on that, let's say we're not in the MarTech space. Let's say we're in a new space and you've got a 15 domain rating and you can rank for things. So domain rating at this point does not matter. Wouldn't it still be a strategic advantage if you were in a new space to build that domain rating up to a 60, 70, 80, 90? Because that would be an effective moat of sorts. Because otherwise, if you're at that point, right, like other people could just come in, focus on backlinks, get to that 30 or 40 and just beat you on all the terms that you're ranking for. So it still would be maybe an important thing to focus on.
Yeah. Sorry, David.
Go ahead, Allie.
He's like hopped in. I was like, yeah. I would say yes. It's always a good idea. I think it also depends on like how your audience discovers and leverages content, which I guess most humans use Google, but you're speaking of a new industry. So if it's not MarTech, maybe it's a group of people that don't spend a lot of time online. Maybe they look for information elsewhere. I think it all comes down to like where your people find information, if they would respond well to like just top one content across the board, which most people would. But I would want to like understand better, like how do your people use Google and what are they looking for?
I think I would zoom out and ask zoom out and just not just say content is blog, but whatever your business is, find out where your audience consumes content, whether it's TikTok or Instagram or whatever.
How do you find that out?
Ask them.
Ideally, you're doing some market research and like interviewing people that are early buyers or early people that you find resonate with what you're producing or creating.
So this would be your customers that you would interview?
If you don't have customers, then at least have a hypothesis on who your customers would be and talking to those people.
So this would be sort of an ideal customer that you would imagine selling to. And let's say that you have a group of these people, like how do you conduct that interview to get these insights with regards to like where they're looking for content?
I'd probably remove like my business or my solution from the equation and just kind of reverse engineer questions of like what problems that they have related to what problems I solve and where do they go for information about XYZ and what like who and what do they trust about this information? Like people trust different things when it comes to technology versus like their health. Like there's different levels and different levers of trust there. So I'd probably just remove like my product or my service from the conversation and just talk vaguely and widely about like problems and solutions and where they find them, how they lever different types of content. So like David said, blog versus other like social media, email newsletters, which is now a big thing, forums, experts, understanding kind of who they trust and then why, and then, you know, how we can create stuff to meet them where they already are. And I think that's why people love Google, because it's an established audience. You know, other types of content, like it's pretty intimidating to think like I have to grow my own audience, whether it's shared or owned. You know, Google's already there. So it's like technically easy to meet people where they are, even though, you know, it's already saturated. So give and take there, but
that's why those communities are so powerful. Like if you can build a community that helps each other, you not only have a place to distribute your content, but you have a place to learn those things because they're just naturally talking about their pain points every single day. And you're like, oh, okay. So if I just write this kind of content, I can, this is clearly going to match what they're looking for.
Yeah. It's interesting because I mean, this goes down a whole different rabbit hole of like finding where the fish are and like learning about them, but then also creating a new watering hole. Mm-hmm. I don't think fish have watering holes, but like having a new place for those fish to then gather that might be more valuable for them to spend time, which is your community.
Yeah.
You can create a fish farm of your own.
No, that's bad. That's bad for the fishes.
A salmon farm. I never know which is the climate and ethically superior option. I never remember which one. Wild salmon is better.
Yes.
I think it's more nutritious anyway. That, you know, there's a crazy fact about Google and like the just the prevalence of it. I think that Alphabet's revenue still comes about like 70 or 80% from Google ads. Mm-hmm. Isn't that fucking crazy? Like, given all their various ventures, it's still like 80% of the revenue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, I want to revisit the conversation of like what the goal of content is. I think at the end of the day, it's just like to build an audience. And that's the kind of thing else you want to do with your business or your personal brand or whatever, like whether it's through creating a blog or an email newsletter or a TikTok profile, you want to create a group of people who care about what you have to say. And from there, like you can do whatever you want. So high domain rating is part of that. If your goal is organic, or maybe it's like number of followers, but whatever you decide to measure it by, it's about building a group of people that care about what you have to say. And sometimes I think in our world, B2B software, it's usually through Google because that's where businesses tend to go search for answers to their questions.
I'm going to be wildly pedantic here, so forgive me. What do you mean when you say care about what you say? Like, what does that, how do you know like somebody cares about what you say?
If we want to look at like quantitative data, I think Tommy Walker talks about like return visitors a lot to their website. So that's a metric that shows people are not just going to your website once for this one thing. They actually want to keep hearing from you. I think one is email subscribers. Maybe they think something you said is interesting, so they want to keep hearing from you. Another part that I think a lot of folks, including maybe myself, need to get more comfortable with is the anecdotal data of just people saying, hey, I love what you're saying or what you're doing, or be helpful just through email or a text or whatever. We get that a lot with the podcast, and it's just a handful of pieces of feedback, but it's enough signal for us to be like, yep, this was the right move doing this podcast. Like, who cares about the number of listeners, like, or the trends there? Eventually we want to look at that, but the fact that we're getting that sort of feedback is, I think, important.
Yeah, well, there's some sense of volition in an audience member raising their hand and saying how much they love your content. And I think that's like a high friction thing to do. So if you get that a couple times, you're like, all right, there's clearly something we're doing correctly here. Even if your audience is smaller, it's like if you have 100 people and 10 of them are raising their hand and saying, this is fucking great, that's better than 1,000 people that you're not hearing anything from because they may be just more lukewarm with what you're putting out. They may be more like transactional, just like searching for your definition of what is SaaS SEO or something.
I know. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to change the topic, so go ahead.
I was going to say one thing that's interesting is, especially if you're in B2B software selling to enterprises, you're not going to get a shit ton of data on traffic. Like there's traffic to capture there. But if you're getting little signals here and there of people finding your stuff interesting or like your product interesting, there has to be, I think you develop your own sort of threshold for what's signal and what's noise based on the size of your market. I think for us, like maybe a big B2B software, maybe it is, but I think we've found an undefined threshold where we're like, yep, let's keep doing this. And people kind of need to figure that out for their own industries and market.
All right. So I want to just get the contrarian shit out of the way. What do you believe about content marketing that most people would disagree with you about? Just give me a bunch of stuff. And don't sugarcoat it.
It's usually contrarian. I would say like most content marketing is shit.
And why?
Because I
think most people thinking about content shouldn't be even thinking about content yet.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you expound on that?
Yeah. Some people are like, how do we start getting leads next week? And I'm like, content's not your play right now. Like if that's your timeline, you should not content. If you're trying to do that while building a content program for a long-term play, then yeah, let's talk. But you're not going to get anything right now. And
so content is not a short-term channel.
Yeah. I think sometimes people think that they're thinking long-term, like 6 months, but I'm like, no, that's not the horizon here at your stage. Like if you have like a 10 domain rating, you're not going to make much progress in that time.
Right. I would think about it in the scope of years if you're just starting out, really. And like if you're not comfortable waiting 2 years to really like sow the seeds of that garden, then it's probably not the channel for you. And you probably should raise another round. You should go for like paid acquisition or something like that. I completely agree with that. Or if you're bootstrapped, right, then you've got like all the time, as long as you're like ROI positive, as long as you're cash flow positive, then maybe you can make it work. But I do find that many of our misconception type clients that come in and they're bad fit are because they basically expect something next month. I think the pillar and cluster model has done more harm than good. Because I think people misunderstand what clusters are. And I think they imagine like a pillar page is like a landing page for some reason, or sometimes they imagine a pillar page has to be 10,000 words, which isn't what the idea ever was. It was more so about like clustering like common topics to build like semantic authority for Google. And I think like that misunderstanding has produced more harm to content programs who feel like they have to cluster everything and create some landing page for like some head keyword, as opposed to just like writing about what their audience cares about.
Yeah, I mean, it really was more of a linking play than anything.
Internal linking. Yeah.
I used to do the pillar pages and they were landing pages and some of them were 10,000 words, but that's just because what worked for HubSpot's audience and how they wanted to structure like their content program. But that's not like a blanket application at all. And I think like even when we're creating strategy, I know it can get in the way of just thinking pretty clearly about like, what do people want to read? Why? How can we create valuable content? So yeah, I would agree that like it has probably distracted people away from the whole point of this whole thing. So
I think what's another good? I think there's a common refrain now that people are talking about like intent and UX signals are all that matter, and links actually don't matter as much anymore. And I think those people have never built a quality link. I think they've never done link building, so they don't understand the value of links, but it's still clearly apparent. And I think they're wrong.
I don't know how contrarian this is anymore. Maybe people think this is pretty common sense, but I think people need to stop trying to copy HubSpot's playbook. And I think the fact that we have HubSpot on our resume should not carry as much weight in a content marketing world.
It's been a surprisingly effective thing to just be like, oh, you guys all came from HubSpot. And it's like, yeah, but their strategy is not going to be in any way relevant to you.
That strategy for you, that's not going to work.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if this is contrarian, but I think that people misappropriate the word strategy often. And I think they think there's one way to do things with content, but really everything comes down to the fundamental business school fucking SWOT analysis. It's like, what are your strengths, weaknesses, threats, and opportunities? And how can we actually like rely on your strengths and like exploit that edge? And that's like everything when it comes to like how much buzzworthy content are we going to produce? How much like cheap and easy top of funnel content are we going to produce? And like there's no one size fits all. It's like how many links are we going to build? Like it's just such a like sliding scale when it comes to that I think any one strategy, like the HubSpot strategy, could work for some companies, right? So I don't think that's even contrarian, but I don't think a lot of people understand that.
I think people need to do more like written published content, like actual in real life content, like magazines and catalogs.
Oh, that's good. Why?
I think online content has become externalized, and there's nothing that feels better than having an actual thing you're holding and like going through and feeling additional value. It also feels more credible for whatever reason. It could be the same damn content that's published on a website, but the fact that they went through the process of publishing, it feels more credible. Like I get catalogs and I'm like, oh, this is great. I could have gone to the website and looked at the exact same shit, but I like this experience better. And I tend to have this, maybe it's my own bias, but I think there's a part of the world moving away from the metaverse, as such people are calling it now, and want to just be IRL.
That's me for sure. But Allie and I were just talking about that before you jumped on, how I feel like what's the word? Luddite, and all the things that tech people love now, I'm like repulsed by.
Yeah.
Like living forever and living in the VR metaverse and shit like that. I'm just like, no, man, I want to die at 90 years old and I want to kayak all the time.
My like list of blocked terms on Twitter just continues to grow. I blocked the word meta because I was like, shut the fuck up. Like you're living, like these people live their lives in this like privileged bubble. I'm like, there's just so much more to all of this than just like maxing out.
Yeah, I wonder if that's a contrarian thing too. Is like I feel like the more time you spend on these online echo chambers like Twitter, talking to other tech people, the worse your writing's going to be. Like I almost, and this is like true for me too. Like I feel like the more time I spend there, the more myopic my mind becomes.
Yeah, it feels like very, I use this word lightly, but like incestual. It's like we all start to like resemble each other. And I had this thought like a couple months ago, it's just like, as much as we all love like differentiation, we sure don't try to do that. And I speak we as like an industry, we don't do that with our content. Like it's one thing to like learn from people who have come before us and like understood what works and what doesn't, but that doesn't have to trickle down into like literally the words that we write.
Yeah. Well, that's, we were talking about this with the blog versus publication or library versus publication thing. And I think, I don't know if I can fully state the frameworks don't matter, but I almost think that if I never knew what a pillar and cluster was or a skyscraper technique or a blog versus library, if I never knew any of this shit, my writing would be just as good, if not better. Like I think almost all of this is a waste of time.
Yeah. I almost respect people who literally don't give a shit because I know it's like genuinely just their stuff, like their thoughts, like their stuff. I don't even have a person that comes to mind because everyone's like so fucking optimized these days.
No, but you know what? Gary Vaynerchuk, actually. I think like I've hated on him a bunch and I think he's kind of annoying, but like I don't think he gives a shit about like these frameworks and stuff.
Right. He doesn't, but like he still plays the game, at least on like Instagram and stuff.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Just like the volume of his messages is just like him trying to just be the loudest and like the biggest and the most contrarian just for the sake of it.
Yeah. Paul Graham, maybe like he's somebody who's got a website built in like 1992 or something like that. He just writes these long form essays with annotations. And I feel like I think he probably understands SEO very well, but I think he chooses not to play any of it, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. I don't know.
I did a podcast. I was on a podcast as a guest last week, and it's folks in MarTech, and they're like, yeah, what do you like? What's your advice for thinking about how to, there's so much saturated market and everyone's doing the same thing and these tactics and stuff. And I was like, honestly, I think we need to like get out of our bubble and pull our head out of our asses, because there's like a whole group of people who are not in tech, not privy to these sort of like savvy marketing tactics stuff, like don't have content written in their industry. Like, have you looked at websites that write about the shipping industry? That content is really crap. Like someone could write very good educational content there. A lot of people don't, like a lot of businesses aren't even using CRM still, because you're all looking at the same market. Like you're not paying attention to these other people that may not be like within the same bubble. And that's like one of my pet peeves.
Well, that's why I think B2B is like, it's going to implode on itself because we're literally all buying each other's shit. like at least D2C has like a window out into the world of normal people. And it's just like the product ends there. Like people, I'm speaking generally, people buy those things out of like sheer joy or function or like because they need it or whatever the reason is. But it's just like there's a light at the end of the tunnel with D2C. And like B2B is just like everyone's just like kind of doing its own, like everyone's buying each other's stuff. And it's just kind of this like very, like you said, it's just this bubble. And the content is starting to resemble each other, like the sales tactics, like all the strategies, all the frameworks, like everything. And it works clearly, but over time, it just kind of like, it's just boring. I don't know.
Yeah,
We'll say though,
contrarian in our industry, but when we step out, it's like, oh wait, there's other industries and groups of people thinking about or doing these things yet.
Well, that's good though. I mean, I think like our industry is what we know. But that's a important kind of, I don't know if it's a piece of advice, but like if you come up in the world of marketers marketing to other marketers who are marketing, then there's a lot you're missing out on. Because I know, for instance, even people in the tech space, even people who are working in sales or customer success, they don't read content the same way that marketers do. Marketers could spend a couple hours per day just reading blog posts from other websites. And that's just not something that a salesperson is going to do. So I know, Mark used to work at Mailshake. Like he would talk about that, how content was a struggle for them because the salespeople wouldn't come and read. They were not going to read like a long form interview or a pillar page on cold emails. It's just not how they got their advice. So I do think that even in our space, if you've only worked at a company like HubSpot or Unbounce or any of those companies that are kind of selling to other marketers, I think that audience is just very different than almost all other audiences. And also that audience is very tiny compared to the rest of the world. So you're really limiting yourself.
I wonder if a takeaway here, like over time, I don't read content about marketing anymore. Knowing that it all kind of says the same shit, but I'm like,
where the sausage is made.
Yeah. And maybe the way to get good at marketing is to ignore what other marketers are saying and like just try to think for yourself before looking to others.
I think it's like you start out though, and you kind of do need that as like a training wheels thing. And then like you go through this process of disillusionment, and it's like a thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? And at the end, you're like, all right, so some of it's okay, but most of it, like I've got to go on my original thing. But I do think like you go through that process where you're like, fuck, like I need to go back to my original thinking. And then maybe someday you learn that hopefully some of the content's valuable too. Some, not all of it's terrible.
Definitely going back to like, I'm going through some challenges where I'm trying to like remind myself of the basics before getting too fancy. And like, I'll Google stuff and like read articles on Reforge about like user acquisition. Oh yeah, right. Like back to basics. That's right. Like I know all this stuff, but it's a good reminder. So definitely need some sort of basics and foundation there.
For sure. Hey, what's up?
I was gonna say the last thing I'd say is like going back to the very beginning of this conversation, remembering why most content is created, and it's not really to help people. So that's where it comes down to like going to someone's website, like CXL, Reforge, Paul Graham, like that's where like that content is going to end up, and mostly has always been the most valuable because it was literally created just because someone cared so much about it to publish it. I think SEO is probably like the most potent distribution channel, but it's also like arguably the least valuable, like the least helpful, depending on like the like blog posts and the topic. But I don't like when I'm looking for something like for my own job to do my job better, I don't go to Google anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it's incentives matter. It's like CXL is trying to like produce content that leads people to believe they're the experts in the field. Reforge is producing content for the same reason and possibly even to like retain their customers. I don't know why Paul Graham is doing it, but it's certainly not for SEO or for money. But then like sometimes you see a blog post that's clearly written just to rank in search and potentially bring in some freemium customers. So what's the incentive, and can you trace that back and, trust it more or less based on that?